Welcome to Warrior Stories. My name is Susanna Clark Taylor. Today is December 22nd, 2022, and my guest today is Kim Drudge from Virginia. Hi, Kim.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you're my guest today. So
Thanks.
I always like to say how I know my guests. And Kim, you and I are fairly new acquaintances, but I have had the opportunity to work with your mom recently. She did an interview with me a couple of weeks ago, Dawn Snow, and she reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to have my daughter come on and actually talk about her own experiences with the challenges that she faces in her life?" And I said, "Yes, please. I would love to have Kim come on Warrior Story." So I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
Kim, could you tell us about your various diagnoses and disabilities and how they have affected your day-to-day life?
Sure, my name is Kim. I'm 20 years old and I'm completely blind. And I have autism and I have hydrocephalus and I have epilepsy. The epilepsy does have to do with my hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is a brain disorder that affects the way that the fluid in my brain is being drained. And autism is a developmental disability, sometimes an intellectual disability that affects the way that some people communicate. Some people don't like loud noises, and some people hyper focus on things.
Right.
And I've been blind since very, very young, and I've just not been able to see. I've been reading Braille since I was two. Well, I've been exposed to Braille since I was two. My favorite things to talk about are the military and accessible education and people with disabilities and language.
Awesome. Kim, I'm so excited to have you here today and talk about all of those things. Speaking particularly of your blindness, how does it affect your ability to get to places or get around when you are in unfamiliar places?
Well, before I had an orientation and mobility instructor, and he or she would teach me strategies. And some were good, some were not so good. And some experiences would traumatize me, some experiences would benefit me.
Right.
And in the unfamiliar places, they would give me cues and they would just tell me, okay, you found this. What do you do now? Or they would say, okay, meet me at this place. But my brain is wired to just go a certain way. I don't know. My brain is just every time I go somewhere in an unfamiliar place, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need help. And they would help me. But now, since I'm in college, I take classes every 6 months. And I would use sighted guide with my mom. And I would let go of her from the door to the elevator, but from the upstairs, she would take me to class and then pick me up, take me out of class, and take me to the car. And there's not really a set place to go by myself.
Right. For those that don't understand, and I think there's probably a lot of us that don't understand, will you explain exactly what that means? Are you talking specifically about your mother was your guide and she helped you get somewhere for the first time, and then after that you're able to get places, or you continue to need your mother to guide you where you need to go?
Sighted guide is not just my mom. A sighted guide is a person who is sighted who guides a person who is blind. The
Right.
person who is blind will take their arm, and in narrow spaces, they would put their arm behind them. The sighted person would.
Uh-huh.
And I'm very good at teaching sighted guide, but there can also be guide dogs.
Right. Do you have a guide dog?
No, I don't.
Is that something that you've chosen not to have, or something that you do want to have? It just hasn't happened yet?
I don't want one right now. I'm not very good with my cane skills, not
Sure.
with my travel skills.
Sure. So does your mom act as your sighted guide every day still, or is there somebody else in your life that is a sighted guide?
Well, I'm on Christmas break right now.
Sure, but when you're in the middle of a semester.
Well, mom acts as my sighted guide right now.
Right. Is that something that now I'm kind of asking questions that I hadn't anticipated asking, really just because I'm curious, and admittedly, there's a lot that I don't know about this. So if it's okay, I'd love to dig in a little bit. So
Sure.
is a sighted guide something that could potentially be provided for you through, say, a Medicaid waiver, or is that not something that you would have access to unless you paid for it privately, and that's why your mom continues to do it?
I don't know a whole lot about waiver stuff.
That's okay.
I do have waivers, but I'm not sure about all the details.
Sure. So that's something that your mom just continues to do for you for right now.
Yes.
Awesome. Your mom is awesome.
Thanks.
So, how does that differ? You just described to me what you need in order to gain access to your college classes. How do those circumstances differ than when you're at home? Like, what are the big differences between being out and about and being at home?
Well, the places are unfamiliar
Sure.
and I'm not very comfortable. I'm not at all comfortable with going places on my own.
Right. And what kind of things do you need at home to make life accessible at home, such as your regular, chores that anybody might have, like cooking or laundry or cleaning or anything like that? What helps you
I,
at home to be able to do those things?
well, I don't cook. I'm a very picky eater and I'm still learning how to do the laundry. I don't do laundry a lot. Mom usually does it.
Uh-huh.
But the washer and dryer are textually labeled, and the microwave is labeled in Braille.
Awesome. So you're able to at least use the microwave if you want to heat something up.
Yes, and I'm nervous about using the oven or the stove.
Sure, I totally understand. Tell us about some of your earliest memories regarding school and educational accessibility.
My earliest memories were learning Braille, and I don't remember all of the days when I was learning Braille because I was so little.
Sure.
But I was just learning Braille, going along, and this was in preschool, and I was in a self-contained class in preschool, and the teachers didn't want me in a mainstream class for kindergarten. And mom was like, oh no, she's going in a mainstream class. And they're like, I'm not comfortable with her going in a mainstream. Well, going in a mainstream. And I went into the mainstream class. It did stress me out.
What did you find the most stressful about the mainstream class?
The noise
Yeah,
was probably the most stressful.
right. I'll bet. Had you been in a separate preschool class prior to that where other children shared some of your challenges, or that was your first experience with a classroom?
No, I was in a self-contained class for preschool
Okay,
where some of the kids shared some of my challenges.
right.
And then in the second half of seventh grade, I struggled like immensely with math. And then I was put into a self contained class just for that.
Gotcha.
And then in eighth grade, I was put into a self contained class, same class. And then in ninth grade, my school didn't have the same type of self contained classes for higher functioning people
Uh-huh.
with autism.
Right.
And so I was just put in a class alone with a math teacher, special education math teacher, and that's okay. But I was never taught algebra the proper way for my needs. And
Gotcha.
I didn't really know it at the time.
Right.
And now I am diagnosed with a specific math learning disability.
Interesting, but you didn't know that when you were working with that special education teacher.
No, I had to take a psych evaluation test, which was kind of funny. They asked me very easy questions and very hard questions and questions in between, and I'd be memorizing things. And turns out that I had a specific learning disability in math.
Interesting. Well, thank goodness you were able to discover that. Has that helped going into college, knowing about that specific learning disability? Do you think that you've been able to use that knowledge to learn math in the way that you need to in college?
I don't take math right now,
Okay.
but I do have to take math.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, I do not like math at all.
I'm not a fan of math either. But do you feel like learning that about yourself helped you as you moved forward in your math classes? Were you able to get the accommodation you needed?
That was just before I graduated.
Okay.
And I dropped out of math the sixth week of my first senior year. I repeated my senior year just to gain some skills
Uh-huh.
and to finish out all of the credits. Because in order to get an advanced studies diploma, you have to take higher math classes. And the only reason why I didn't get an advanced studies diploma is because I didn't want to take higher advanced math classes.
Gotcha. But it sounds like you're going to have to take math in college. So
Yes.
I'm sure that feels a little bit stressful for you coming coming up?
Only quantitative reasoning and probability and statistics. I don't know, not now, how hard it's going to be.
Right. Well, you sound like you're pretty smart. I'm not sure I could handle those math classes myself.
Oh my gosh, I almost couldn't.
So going back to your elementary school experiences, is there a time you remember as being like the first time that you can remember that things were not accessible in elementary school?
I was kind of excluded from computer classes, like computer, like resource computer lab. They were playing games. And I would just sit there and sit there.
Right. How did that make you feel?
Made me feel excluded, bored.
Right, right, of course. I can only imagine. I mean, that's how it would make anybody feel to not
Mm-hmm.
be able to participate when everybody around you is doing something. What efforts were made during that time period to make things accessible for you by the teachers? Did they make efforts to make it accessible or they simply left you out? Like, how did that go?
With the computer stuff.
Right. What
And
was your
it helped me a little bit. They
uh-huh.
just like played games, but not really.
Yeah, kind of like they tried, but not really.
Tried, but didn't do much and didn't
Right.
do enough, in my opinion.
Right, right. I totally understand that. So the other day when I was talking to your mom, she shared some experiences, and I would love to hear about them from your perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
tell us about the time when you and your mom had to hire attorneys to fight for your right to receive FAPE. And I always want to explain acronyms. So FAPE, I know you know this, but FAPE means free appropriate public education. And every child in America by federal law has the right to receive FAPE. So tell us about the battle that you and your mom had to engage in where you had to hire attorneys to fight for your right to receive FAPE.
Yes. I was in seventh grade. This was in middle school. I was in seventh grade, and people were using Chromebooks, and
Mm-hmm.
I was using a PC computer.
Mm.
At the time were not accessible. And if they were accessible, they were very limited. And I had JAWS on my PC and a screen reader which they called Chromebox.
Mm.
I didn't really know how to access Chromebox or JAWS very well because I had barely any tech education.
Right.
And every time I went into the school, like my mom said, the internet would reset itself. And then the websites wouldn't work with my JAWS, they wouldn't work with my JAWS. And then they wouldn't get me a tech trainer. And although the tech trainer was okay, she was local and she didn't even know how to work extensively with JAWS. And my mom almost had a nervous breakdown. She ended up having to put me on homebound.
Mm-hmm.
And I improved. And in eighth grade, I was back in school. And I've gotten some education and I improved quite a bit.
So your mom had to hire attorneys to come in
Mm-hmm.
and tell the school that they needed to provide you with the technology you needed in order to access your education and to get you the tech trainer for that technology that knew exactly what it is you needed to do in order to access your education. Because if you have a tech trainer, but they don't know how to train you appropriately on the technology, then there really is no point of having that tech trainer, right?
Mm-hmm. And they refused. The school system refused, like, we don't want to put in the money.
Right.
We don't want to do this. And mom hired attorneys from the Disability Law Center
Right.
of Virginia. That's where I interned over the summer.
Awesome.
Yeah, I interned at DLCV and they hired attorneys. And turns out the school system hired attorneys against us.
Right.
We ended up settling and I ended up getting the tech trainer I need. Everything was great.
So how were things after that battle with the attorneys? All your materials, were they accessible after that, or do you still have challenges with accessibility?
I still have challenges. It's not just a school thing, it's a national thing.
Right.
There's actually a bill that's being introduced by, I believe it's the American Foundation for the Blind about accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to hope and pray that it's going to get passed.
Right, right. It's the Website and Software Applications Accessibility Act, and it's being introduced by Senator
Tammy Duckworth.
That's right, Senator Duckworth out of Illinois. Yep.
She actually served in the the Army.
Awesome. And we are going to get into that in a little bit, your interest in the military. So how did
I
it
just,
feel once you were able to gain better access to your education? How did that make you feel? Like, I'd love to dig into the way that it affects a person's confidence, a person emotionally, going from so many challenges with accessibility to suddenly being able to have, and I know it's not perfect because you still have accessibility challenges today, but
Mhm.
how did it feel when you were able to gain access to your education with more consistency after that battle with the attorneys?
It was amazing. It was awesome, awesome, awesome.
And you were able to get another tech trainer, right? The right tech trainer for you?
Finally got the right tech trainers, and they're out of state, so I zoomed in with them,
Right.
or I Skyped it first, and then we started doing Zoom.
How long did you work with those tech trainers? Was it just one, or were there a group of tech
They
trainers?
were a group. I worked with nine over the years,
Uh-huh.
and I worked with them until I graduated.
Right. So you mentioned a little bit before, but I'd like to dig into this a little bit more. Right now, you're in college. What are some
Mhm.
challenges you are facing right now in your life regarding accessibility, both with technology and then perhaps other areas? You already mentioned how you need your mom to be your sighted guide, but what other challenges are you facing right now in regard to accessibility?
There's this platform called Canvas. Have you heard of it?
Only through your mom, but I don't have any personal familiarity with it.
Yeah, Canvas is like a school website and it's accessible on the computer pretty much, but it's not really accessible on my phone. Computers and phones screen readers work differently. My phone is VoiceOver, my computer is JAWS, and my phone, I'm not able to look at the annotations that my teacher put on my Canvas when I was doing my research papers.
Uh-huh.
I was in a history class and I was doing research papers, which is not very fun, but I did it and he would give me annotation in inaccessible PDF. And I should have said right off the bat, hey, this PDF is not accessible. Can you please either give me the annotations in an accessible Microsoft Word document or an accessible audio format like an MP4 or an MP3?
So it's not accessible. And have you been able to communicate that to them in order to have them make it accessible, or that's still something that you're dealing with?
Still something I'm dealing with, and it's not the teacher's fault.
Right.
It is the Canvas is nationally used, or is it internationally used? It's not just used by my college; it's used
Sure.
everywhere. And it's not my teacher; it's the people who made Canvas. I take that back. Sometimes it's the teachers, sometimes it's the people who made Canvas. But my teacher gave me annotations in an inaccessible PDF, but he would also put Word documents on Canvas for everybody.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you continue to have problems with accessibility in college, just like you did
Mhm.
in high school.
But not as bad.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. And I take it that, I don't actually know how that works specifically because in grade school and going through high school, you have access to those federal rights of FAPE. All children have a right to FAPE, which goes all the way
Mhm.
to high school, but that doesn't apply to college, right? And so individual colleges should, according to the ADA, they should make everything accessible. Unfortunately, it sounds like they're not perfect at doing that. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, and that's because the ADA doesn't have guidelines.
Right, specifically for technology, because a lot
Yes.
of the technology we use today didn't exist when the ADA was passed in 1990, right?
Right. The internet actually came out in 1993 and then it was used only for government.
Right. And according to the Websites and Software Applications Accessibility Act, like this would help improve things specifically for professional workplace spaces, but it needs to apply also to education, right? Because otherwise, how are people supposed to be educated in using these technologies in order to become working professionals, right?
Exactly.
So hopefully everybody gets behind this bill and we can get it passed through Congress soon and support Senator Duckworth and the hard work that she's doing behind that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, Kim, the last time we spoke, you told me all about how much you love the military. So, I want to talk about that for a minute. So, tell us what you love so much about the military and why you wish you could join.
Well, I love it because they fight for the freedoms that we have. If we didn't have our military, we wouldn't have our freedoms. And the military does what they do, so we can do what we do. You and I, my mom,
Yep.
every single one of us here. And they fight all over the world to protect us.
Yep. Yeah, they're pretty amazing. You were in junior ROTC, so tell us about that experience.
So I was in JROTC because I loved the United States and I wanted to try it out. And I wanted to just break down some barriers. And JROTC was awesome at first. I met the instructors and they seemed very welcoming. And I asked one of the instructors, can a blind person be in JROTC? And he said yes. And I ran back to, I was in the cafeteria for lunch at my high school, and I ran back to the little office where my vision teacher was at the time. And I said, I can join. I can join. Oh my gosh, I can do this.
That's
I
awesome.
loved it. And then at the end of the first year, things started to change. My self esteem started to go down. And one of the instructors started to discriminate against me. He started calling me out a little bit, making me find the restroom without my cane sometimes, or a guide, when I'm standing in the middle of the classroom.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And then we went on a field trip to Marine Corps Base Quantico with some other cadets. And he expressed that I slowed everybody down. And I am a little bit slower to move, but it's not a bad thing.
Right.
And then we were marching for a midterm. This was drill. This was like a drill test. And we were marching. I had a guide, but I couldn't use my cane.
Mm.
And you know what? They didn't tell me that a curb was there, and I tripped and fell.
Oh no.
And landed on my hip, I think. And I was doing a left flank march. We turned to the left at the same time while marching. And then, boom, I fell on my side in the mud.
Oh no.
In uniform.
Oh.
And mom had to pack a change of clothes. I was ticked off.
Yeah, that must have felt really frustrating.
Oh, but I laughed at first. I was laughing just because it was funny, just the falling part.
Right.
But it was just crazy.
That has to be really frustrating when you're trying so hard and then because the communication wasn't there, you end up having an accident where you're injured.
And when I was at Quantico, my personal assistant, a lot of people who have disabilities have paraprofessionals. My paraprofessional wouldn't help me with, personal hygiene.
Right.
And I was like, I need help, I need help, I need help, I need help. And one of the instructors seemed very appalled, very upset about that. Like, why does she need help?
Right.
And turns out other people help each other. Why do I need help?
Right.
And then the final thing was, well, this wasn't the final thing. When they got back, he had the other cadets write up a complaint form.
A complaint form against you?
Against me.
What was in the complaint? Was it specifically about your disabilities and the challenges that you faced?
I didn't read the complaint form. This was a meeting that my mom had.
Gotcha.
But the final thing was the instructor wouldn't let me participate in the color guard. That was the thing that I wanted to be in most, was the color guard with the American flag and the Marine Corps flag and the rifles.
That must have been really frustrating.
Yes. And mom actually wrote up a formal report. I told you the other day that I wrote an essay in Spanish class wanting people with disabilities to serve, and he screamed in my face.
Right. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So outside of junior ROTC, this was an assignment in Spanish class, correct?
Yes, in Spanish.
And you love Spanish, right?
Sí, yes.
So in Spanish class, you were assigned to write an essay, and the essay topic that you chose was people with disabilities being able to serve in the military. Is that correct?
Yes, that was right.
And then after you turned it in as an assignment in Spanish class, you shared that with your junior ROTC instructors as a form of advocacy for people with disabilities being allowed to be in the military. And what was their response?
This was great essay, but I kind of disagree with you. I disagree with the thing that you were writing. There's other jobs that you can do in the military as a civilian. And we had a little debate, but I was respectful. This was one of the instructors. Mm-hmm. And the other instructor came over and screamed at me. I mean, he wasn't right up in my face, but he was a couple feet away. But he screamed at me like, what if you can't see or hear in combat? And I understand the combat standpoint, but 80% of the military is non-combat.
Right.
And I came home in tears. I told my mom about it, and he did this to me twice. Twice.
Right. So it sounds like this particular instructor was not thrilled about having somebody with disabilities, even in junior ROTC, and became visibly upset when you
Oh, yeah.
advocate for people
Yeah.
with disabilities to be able to be in the military. And I did
Mhm.
look that up, and it does look like, and I actually learned that from you. And so I had to do some outside research because, to be honest, it's not something that I had ever considered before. And that is that the military is not required to follow the ADA. And from what I understand, their argument is, well, we need our servicemen and women to be ready for combat at a moment's notice. And I understand that, but from your perspective, it sounds like 80% of the jobs in the military are non-combat anyway. And so perhaps they should allow people with disabilities to be able to fill some of those roles and be able to serve their country in that way. It sounds
Active duty, but without going into combat.
right, right.
Yeah.
And it sounds like for servicemen and women who are injured in the line of duty and become disabled, accommodations are made for many of them in order for them to stay in the military if they so desire. Not always,
Mhm.
but in some cases. But it doesn't sound like they make accommodations for people with disabilities coming into the military. Why do you think that the military should allow people with disabilities to serve in non-combat positions?
I was inspired by my mom and JROTC. And I actually listened to a TED talk of a guy who was deaf, but he was in ROTC, college ROTC. But he went to a recruiter at first and he wanted to join the Navy. And the recruiter didn't even say, the recruiter didn't know sign language, but he didn't even write down on a piece of paper, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but you can't join the Navy." He just said, "Bad ear,
Wow.
disqualified, I think.
Yep.
Bad ear," instead of saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't join the Navy." He ended up being in Army ROTC for 2 years, and he couldn't advance ahead for the next 2 years because he had to have a hearing test. You can go for your first 2 years in ROTC, but then to commission as a second lieutenant or an ensign in the Navy or the Army or whatever, you have to have a hearing test and you have to be committed to serve 4 years active, 5 years active, and 3 years reserve. And I think that's West Point. But I'm not sure about regular college ROTC. And people who are disabled, I'm not sure if they can get into West Point or the Naval Academy.
Right. So tell me about the bill that you are drafting. I was really impressed to hear that you're drafting a bill. Tell us what it's called and tell us a little bit about that.
It's called the We Deserve to Serve Act, and it's not finished yet. Some ideas keep popping in my brain, but it's like bases should have wheelchair ramps, and people should be provided with sign language interpreters, and there should be braille printers, embossers, and there should be for people to take the ASVAB. You know what the ASVAB test is?
I don't. Tell me.
The
Okay,
abbreviation just flew out of my brain, but it's a
I'll,
test for enlisted people to get into the military.
I'll look it up for you. Hold on. The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
Boom! It was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't.
Totally fine. So I take it the ASVAB is not currently accessible for people with disabilities. Is that right?
At all, and they're not even allowed to take it with accommodation.
Interesting.
And they should be able to get it in Braille, should be able to get into a Word document or an accessible PDF or whatever is accessible for them. Same as the ACT or the SAT.
Right. So it sounds like this is something you're really passionate about, and you're going to be working on this piece of legislation. I'm really impressed, Kim, because, I have advocated in the disability space for a little while now. I have helped other people draft legislation, and I have advocated for pieces of legislation that are already drafted, but I have never attempted to draft a piece of legislation myself. So I was pretty impressed when I learned that you are drafting your own piece of legislation.
Thank you.
So Kim, is there anything else you would like to share about either the bill that you're drafting or just the advocacy work that you try to engage in regarding people with disabilities and specifically with the blind community?
There is a shortage of TBIs, teachers for the blind and vision impaired, and O&Ms, orientation and mobility instructors. If there is anybody who wants to be an O&M or TBI or a technology trainer, do your best and never quit. And I would like the bill to be passed through legislation ASAP.
Right. So we can get some of those accommodations implemented into professional spaces and especially into educational spaces, right?
Yes.
And you're right, there is a teacher shortage and there's kind of a crisis going on right now with teachers. But it sounds like for children who are visually impaired or blind, they need more TVIs, they need more tech trainers, and they need more teachers to enter this field because for blind students, it's imperative that they have the right teachers and the right tech trainers in order to gain access to their education, right?
Right.
There's
There
also
is also a shortage of military personnel too.
Right. Well, keep working on that piece of legislation and don't back down because I think you're doing great work and you're bringing light to an issue that, some people might not know exists. So I think that's really great.
Thank you so much.
Kim, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm so grateful for all the ways in which you've educated me about your experiences and how some of these issues affect the broader disability community. And I just think you're amazing. And I hope that you keep working hard in this space and keep implementing all the positive changes in the world that you're currently working on.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too.
All right, bye.
Bye.